Hello, I'm Jake Boudreau, civic journalist at Tello Community Television. This week, on The Record, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada released its report into the investigation of the sinking of the Mucktown Girl, which took place off Canso in March 2022, resulting in the death of a crewman. I attended the November 25th regular monthly meeting of Richmond Municipal Council, and after the meeting, I spoke with Warden Lois Landry and Deputy Warden Brent Sampson. But first, Nova Scotia election 2024 results. After the votes were counted on November 26, the Progressive Conservatives came away with an historic 43 seats, with the New Democratic Party netting 9 seats, and the Liberals in last place with 2 seats. In the riding of Richmond, incumbent Progressive Conservative Trevor Boudreau had 3,496 votes. Liberal candidate Rachel Hood tallied 1,221 votes, and Mark Curry, the NDP candidate, had 218 votes. Voter turnout in Richmond was down from 71% in 2021, as 61.78% of eligible voters cast ballots. In the riding of Inverness, Progressive Conservative candidate Kyle McQuarrie received 4,058 votes. Liberal candidate Jamie Beaton had 2,099 votes, while the NDP candidate Joanna Clark took 884 votes. Voter turnout was 49.09% in the riding of Inverness, which takes in the town of Port Hawkesbury and the municipality of the county of Inverness. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada has ruled that the planning for towing disabled vessels and the safety culture within the fishing industry are both lacking. On November 21st, the TSB released its investigation report into the rescue operation of the fishing vessel Mucktown Girl, which sank off Canso in March 2022, resulting in injuries to 2 Canadian Coast Guard crew and the death of 1 member of the fishing crew. On the night of March 11th, 2022, the TSB said Mucktown Girl, with 5 people on board, experienced electrical problems and contacted the Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax. The next morning, the Canadian Coast Guard vessel Jean Goodwill arrived on scene where the fishing vessel had no power, the TSB noted. The TSB said in the report that with a storm forecast, the decision was made to tow the disabled vessel. The investigation found the fishing vessel had not been assessed as being in imminent distress. Therefore, the crew remained on board as the vessel was towed. 6 hours into the operation, the TSB determined that the tow failed due to high towing speed, harsh weather conditions, and the towing arrangement, but there were no contingency plans to re-establish the tow or to remove the crew from the Mucktown Girl. The master of the Mucktown Girl reported to the master of the Jean Goodwill that the vessel was managing in the sea conditions and the crew remained on the drifting vessel to weather the storm, the report states. On the morning of March 13th, the TSB said the weather conditions significantly deteriorated, with waves of 8 to 10 meters and winds up to 90 kilometers an hour. The fishing vessel began taking on water, then the crew donned immersion suits and abandoned the vessel into their life raft without informing the Canadian Coast Guard vessel, the report notes. As a result of the difficult environmental conditions, the TSB said 2 crew members of the Coast Guard vessel were injured while preparing for the rescue. Communications further broke down between the 2 vessels, affecting the coordination of the rescue operation, the report reads. 4 crew members from the Mucktown Girl boarded the Coast Guard vessel from the water, while 1 was swept away and he was recovered from the water, but later pronounced deceased, the report notes. The investigation found that without comprehensive contingency planning for towing disabled vessels, risked the rescuers as well as crews of vessels under tow may be increased. The board said this occurrence raises concerns related to systematic safety issues identified on the TSB watch list. Commercial fishing safety has been on the TSB watch list since 2010 and will remain there until there are sufficient indications that a sound safety culture has taken root throughout the industry and in fishing communities across the country, the TSB noted. At the regular monthly meeting of Richmond Municipal Council, the Committee of the Whole report was read, which included an elections report provided by Richmond County Returning Officer Claire Rankin. And one of the things discussed was the rules for candidates looking to run in the municipality. Council also decided to make elections part of its overall communications policy.
I have a question about some suggestions you might have, and open it up to anyone here. We're so concerned about voter apathy and also, lack of people running. So anytime we can make sure that that goes as well as, we don't put any hurdles up. I wonder if you could speak to the fact that quite often what happens is, not each time, I think it's August 26th is the date that they say you can now become a candidate in the municipal election. But in order to do that, you need the form signed saying your taxes are not are paid, but we can't get that from the municipality until September 1st. Now, it may be that there's nothing we can do about that, but I'm just wondering if there are some options around getting ahead of that in the next election cycle and making sure that our socials really explain that although you're going to see lots about being able to, go in and get because there are people who, take time off work to come into the municipal office to get that form signed, and then I was one. I came before September 1st, and then I wasn't able to get, I'm retired, it's easy. But I think anything we can do to streamline the process. I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that might be.
Well, I think the Act says that the day you're nominated, you had taxes, you have to have that certificate. So if you come in on the August 27th, then you paid your taxes that day. To me, I would accept it if you were able to get the letter saying that you were paid on that day. It really is there's a confusing thing about September 1st, and the taxes for the next round of municipal taxes are due on that day. So that kind of is overriding the message that you can come in on the 26th. So I think it's an internal discussion that you have to have with both your finance department and your lawyer, because I think that could be sorted out long before the next election and see what the understanding is. Because if one form says you can come in on the 26th, but you're not allowed to get the form from the county, or you can't get the form until September 1st, it's just it's a misunderstanding somewhere, I believe. And I think the lawyer would, because I did ask the provincial returning officer.
I'm
sorry. No, it's still on. No, sorry. And that's what she said. It's like it's in the Act. You can get it on the 26th, but it's an in-house thing, I think. It has to do with the timing of the tax bill going out. Yeah, I don't know if because it goes out September 1st, but it's not due till November. See, there's a gray area that you may be able to fix. Yeah, and the other thing is, we were only one of 3 municipalities in the province to go paper only. The others were Clark's Harbour and Lockport. So next election, it seems that an electronic vote would be the most advantageous especially to get to the younger voters, who they can pick up their phone, get their PIN, and vote right there and then, and not have to, make a trip to the polling station. So that would be another way to get more people out, I think.
And I think the confusion around the rules for provincial voting and the rules for municipal voting is a challenge as well. But I appreciate that. And we've got 4 years, but I think anything we can do to kind of close up some of those issues. Any other comments, concerns? Councillor Marchand?
Yeah, the taxes are only due November the 1st. So why couldn't we get a letter on August 26th? The tax bill that comes out September the 1st, and I believe staff here puts it out sooner than they normally do, they're not due by the 10th of September. So our taxes would be paid as long as your April bill is paid. So where's the error in having to pay the taxes that are due a month or two, even after the election.
I don't issue the paper, so it's not me that has any qualms about that. It's like, when you come in, I can't force the municipality to give you a paper. You come in and apply for it, and they have their own internal reasons why you can't get it before September 1st.
I guess that's a staff question then.
It is. And like I said to the board, we'll take this one away and we'll run it through the ringer and see what we come up with. Appreciate the feedback.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, just to point out that as of right now, with the provincial election for Richmond County, there are 8 people working in the returning officer's office to look after the election in Richmond. And it was just me for this one. So hopefully it'll go smoother and nothing will be out of the ordinary, because they have a lot of people to check up on it.
Thank you, thank you. I'm glad to just, anytime we can tighten up procedures and clean up some things that just don't marry up, it's always advantageous. It was no huge catastrophe. Certainly nobody was left out of running, but it just doesn't hurt to kind of address those. Go ahead, Councillor Member Kipp.
So thanks, Claire. So the nomination papers that were filed, remember you and I were having a conversation when I filed mine, and it does say clearly on the bottom that they're public documents, so you can publicize them. And I don't know if I'm asking you the question, maybe I'm not asking you the question, maybe I'm putting it out in the universe to staff, though we didn't really consider elections in our communications plan, what can and cannot be publicized. So I'm wondering if, I don't know if we could make a motion to refer that to policy and bylaw, to consider adding in elections-related materials into our comms plan, because really those nomination papers should be included in that, right? And God knows what else. So I'm just kind of wondering about making that kind of a motion. Yeah. So Claire, yeah.
Well, it was actually for the first time they were available online.
Oh, okay.
They were on the county website, and people, so I didn't know who was coming through the door, because
once they're filled out.
once they're filled out, and there is another flaw there in my point, in that when you file your nomination papers, all I get from you is your address. So I was being contacted by all kinds of media saying, can you send their email and their phone number? I said, I don't have it. I mean, I don't have it as the returning officer. I might have it because, I play hockey with, Mike. And no, but that's the only reason I had it. And so there was no, that is something that might want to be included on the nomination papers for a reason like that. If the media wanted to know all your contact information, but I had to refer them to Shelley or, no, you didn't have them either. So it's I know there's a privacy issue there, but if the box was there to be able to be ticked off by potential nomination papers where the returning officer would be able to release that information, it would make life go a little easier for everyone.
So do we have a motion?
I would make the motion to refer our communications plan back to bylaw and policy to include elections information, although not, of course, great urgency on that because we don't have to worry about it for another 4 years. But to your point, Warden, we could tighten that up in the meantime.
So there's a motion on the floor. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that motion.
Seconded by Councillor Sampson. Is there any debate on the motion? Hearing none, the motion on the table is to refer the communication plan back to the Bylaw and Policy Committee to add election information. All those in favor, say aye. Yes? Those opposed? Motion is carried. So we're going to move on to item number 8 on your agenda, which is committee reports. For those of you following along, committee of the whole report is first, and that is at page 22 of your very lengthy package. And so I will turn it over to Deputy Warden Sampson for the committee of the whole report.
Committee of the Whole Report, November 2024. The committee met on November 12, 2024. The committee discussed communications related to the municipal election. I move that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to refer the Strategic Communications Plan to Bylaw and Policy Committee for the purpose of incorporating communications related to the municipal election.
There's a motion on the floor. Can I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Mumbercat, that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to refer the Strategic Communications Plan to the Bylaw and Policy Committee for the purpose of incorporating communications around this election. Question? All those in favor? Those opposed?
So the role surrounding the payment of property tax bills for your municipal candidates, does that need to change to encourage more people to run? Something that came up in the election report of the returning officer, Claire Rankin, from basically the committee as a whole, but there was some discussion on that you guys talked about.
So, yeah, so the issue is the dates. It is a provincial requirement that in order to run for municipal election, you have to provide a certificate from somebody here in the municipal office that all of your accounts are paid in full. The problem that I ran into, others ran into, and people in previous elections have run into, is that our tax bill cycling requires that a bill is produced on September 1st, and therefore you can't get the letter until September 1st, but only once you paid your November taxes. Now, there's two problems with that. One is that we see all over the media, I think the date was August 26th, I believe. Okay, it's August 26th. Anybody who would like to run for municipal council, please go ahead and get your pages in. We're here, we're open for business. But in fact, in Richmond County, we aren't open for business because of September 21st. That's September 1st date. The second issue is that for somebody like me, as an example, I have a mortgage and I pay taxes, and my bank takes my mortgage payments out of included in my mortgage payment, and that's deposited in a little account, and they send that money to the municipality. But I had to come up with the money to pay my taxes up front. Then the credit union paid them on November 1st, and then I had to get that money back. So it's just, I believe at this juncture, when we saw, Mulgrave, every single person got in by acclamation, right? I just think anything we can do to make sure that we're not discouraging anybody from running for government, I just think those are things that are worth looking at.
Next in the Committee of the Whole report, the $5,000 grant request from Royal Canadian Legion Branch 150 in Arishad came up, as well as letters of support for other projects.
The committee discussed the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 150 grant request for the Type 1 infrastructure grant funds in the amount of $5,000. I move that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to approve the grant request from the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 150 for the Type 1 infrastructure grant funds in the amount of $5,000, pending the submission of their balance sheet, and further move that the funds be allocated as follows: $1,000 from District 1 funds, $1,000 from District 2 funds, and $3,000 from the regional funds.
Motion on the floor. Can I have a seconder? I'll second. Seconded by Councillor Mumbercat. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Mumbercat.
Thanks, Warden. So, yeah, I guess from, and I had sent a little note through as well today, just want to make sure that maybe when we get those grant requests, if we make sure we have the full package, I think the balance sheet would have raised some additional questions from councillors. Like I said, it's not going to sway my support for the project, but it would have probably prompted some additional questions that I think maybe we would have had a chance to discuss, but no, fully supportive, and I just wanted to kind of make that note. Thank you.
Yeah, I think no good deed goes unpunished, but I think it's important for us to have every bit of the information before we discuss those in council. So I think that's a valid concern. So any other discussion on that motion?
I was just wondering what kind of questions would it bring up? We know the numbers are there now, so if we're going to support it now, we would have probably supported it even having it. So, but it definitely was alarming to see, to have that information and still, provide this grant. But it is a good cause for sure.
Yes, I think that in our real desire to see this project, the emergency shelter with the showers that we don't have in the rest of the county. I think that was something we were very taken with, but I think it is just important for us to be mindful in the future to make sure that everything is in place. So it's a lesson for all of us. So there is a motion on the floor. Is there any other discussion? Councillor Marchand, Member Kett?
Thank you, Warden. So yeah, I mean, I guess some of the questions that would have prompted me was it looked like a fairly healthy balance sheet. Are there funds there restricted? Are there unrestricted? These are the kinds of questions that we had started to ask other nonprofits when they would come in that had, you know, what appeared to be healthy balance sheets, but actually, in fact, oftentimes were very restricted in what they were able to use the funds for. And again, just also kind of wanted to reiterate that sort of overall county approach to understanding how much we're going to be investing in emergency shelters and where those will be, you know, to differentiate them from the comfort stations, which I think we've all become very familiar with. So, yeah, I'm hoping we can have some additional conversation around our county-wide strategy on the issue of shelters. So, thank you.
Yes, I agree, and I think it's important also for us to know what is an emergency shelter requirement, and if there are times where groups are going over and above that, and what that means for the county. So I think it is worth having all the information. Again, there is a motion on the floor. Is there any more discussion? Okay, questions called. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Those opposed? The motion is carried.
Was the information councillors were talking about in regard to the grant request from Royal Canadian Legion Branch 150, looking for renovations to accommodate emergency shelter? What was that information that the councillors were talking about that was received and some described as alarming in some cases?
Yeah, so no good deed goes unpunished. So the Royal Canadian Legion in Ayrshire does amazing work. They are doing something over and above what other comfort stations are doing. So they are installing showers, and what was really, and accessible showers at that. And what, you know, as the principal of a school, we were not permitted to open the school when the school was shut down for people to go and take showers. But we saw during Dorian, we saw Kinexcel opening up showers, and they got a lot of business. When we at Richmond Education Center and Academy, when we did eventually open our doors again, we had towels and shampoo, and we had a lot of kids taking us up on that. So Councillor Sampson and I went to the Legion. They were really, you know, open to conversations about, you know, having their people not in an emergency that the Red Cross designates, but even in, you know, a situation where a small road has no power for days and days and days, particularly now that people are, you know, we're not all from here. We all didn't grow up here. We don't have a ton of family. So we had those conversations, and around the table, nothing but positive things to say about the Legion. In our request, in our quest to get that moving as quickly as we could for the Legion, we sort of said, oh, they're missing a financial statement, and we really should, you know, but it's just such an important thing, and we were all on board with that. So what happens though is that when you see organizations that have, you know, good amount of dollars in the bank, it would help us to be more thoughtful in our questions about that. But as somebody who sits on many committees, I will tell you that there are times, so for example, I sit on the board at L'Arche Cape Breton. We have funds, but they are earmarked for very specific things. So for example, we had a proposal for a accessible trail. I can't spend that. Our board can't spend that money on anything else. So it's really not disposable income. So there are just some questions like that we are kind of scolding ourselves for in our quest to do right by a group that is really doing such tremendous work. We really need to be mindful of the fact that these are, you know, municipal dollars, and we need to be really vigilant about our record keeping.
The committee discussed the Ile Royale ATV Club's request for a letter of support. I move that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to have the Warden prepare a non-monetary letter of support for the Ile Royale ATV Club regarding the Capelin Cove Wilderness Area as outlined in the request.
Moved by Deputy Warden Sampson, seconded by Councillor Marchand, to have a non-monetary letter of support for the Ile Royale ATV Club regarding Capelin Cove. Discussion? All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried.
The committee discussed the Dr. Kingston Memorial Community Health Center's request for letters of support. I move that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to have the Warden prepare letters of support for the Dr. Kingston Memorial Community Health Centre for their application to the Community Foundation of Nova Scotia Visions Fund grant and the Age-Friendly Communities Grant Program as outlined in the request.
Can I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Marchand. Question? Do you have something to say? Or that, okay. Okay. So there's a motion on the floor. All those in favor of recommending that letters of support go for Kingston Memorial Health Centre?
I just had a comment. In this one, I noticed you didn't put non-monetary. Are they aware, or are we potentially going to be supporting them with some funds in the future?
To be fair, the motion didn't say that, right? So I specifically included, while we cannot, a phrase that spoke about it, it was not specifically part of the motion in this instance. Yeah, so. Question? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Or raise your hand. Contrary-minded? Motion is carried.
The committee discussed contact information. I move that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to have staff investigate the use of generic email addresses and landline phone numbers for members of Council.
Moved by Deputy Warden Sampson, seconded by Councillor Marchand to investigate generic email addresses and landline phone numbers. All those in favor? Oh, sorry. Some discussion on that, Councillor Mumbercat?
Thank you, Warden. So just wanted to kind of put it on the record that I would agree with, I love the idea of like the landline phone numbers and forwarding, because I think that would create some consistency. But I wouldn't be in favor of the generic email address, because I think part of, part of working with our constituents is having a personal approach with them. And also I think that, as we move from one council to another council, it would be the responsibility of the new councillor to kind of get up to speed. And I'm just not fully loving the idea of sharing generic email. Another thing is that sometimes, a person, even though I know all of our information is FOIP-oppable, but sometimes members of the public will email the councillor information that they wouldn't typically necessarily want to be public or for anybody else to know. And I just would like to protect the privacy of our constituents that way. I don't know if there's another way around it, because that idea of sharing an email inbox, or if we're just talking about an email address forward. There's just some question marks for me around that, and maybe it's part of the investigation, but I just wanted to kind of put a little bit of concern on the record there. So.
Sure. So I think the motion is to have staff investigate the use. So I think we can investigate that and consider that as in reference to what they tell us. But just a point of clarification, I think FOIPOP, if anybody sends anything to an @Richmond County email, every instance, whether it went to Lois.Landry or, yeah, so. So the motion is to recommend the council investigate the use of these. Sorry, yes, that's staff. Investigate the use of generic email addresses. So there is a motion on the floor. Call for a question. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed?
This concludes the Committee of the Whole report for the month of November 2024, and I move its adoption.
Moved by Councillor Marchand and seconded by, Deputy Brent Sampson, and seconded by Councillor Marchand, that the Committee of the Whole report for the month of November be adopted. Just a comment, and I guess maybe just throw this out for a question. After the meeting last week, particularly since the folks who were looking for letters of recommendation had waited a good amount of time because of the election. I wrote those already. They're attached in the money. Is there any concern about wanting us to wait until after the council meeting when this is forwarded? Because these folks were waiting for letters for a long time, right? So, and in one case, the actual application had passed, and I was sending it with the hopes that they would be allowed to consider. So is there any concern, or would you like to give direction to the warden around whether we wait for council meeting to approve that these letters be written?
I would say it's up to you if you want. I mean, we had that discussion, you and I expressed potential concerns, but if it's non-monetary, go ahead and give it to them, especially for ones, like you say, that are, restricted time-wise.
Thanks. I would agree with Councillor Marchand. I would go so far as to say for non-monetary, and if it's aligning with our strategic plan, and I know I would trust your judgment on that. I would question whether it needs to come to a committee of the whole or council. I think anything monetary will have to, but if it's non-monetary, I would be in favor of, giving you, rein to write those letters, because a lot of times grant deadlines sneak up on people, and I know that. I know they're published in advance, but we have a lot of volunteers trying to juggle a lot of things right now. And if they realize 2 days before the deadline, and then our council meeting, even committee of the whole, is not for another 2 weeks, we could be, creating an issue for them. So anyway, that would be my kind of opinion there. Thank you, Warden.
Yeah, just for members of the public, there was discussion among councillors about, in these particular instances where this group of folks had been kind of waiting and wanted letters to support big grant applications that they were making, but we didn't seem to have consensus. But what I'll take from this conversation is that so long as we discuss it at least one meeting, then we certainly can go ahead, and I don't need to wait until the council meeting. Okay. So there's a motion on the floor. Is there any other discussion? Okay. Call for question. All those in favor of adopting the Committee of the Whole report for the month of November, please say so. Those opposed? Motion is carried.
I noticed during the council meeting that you expressed some concern that not only Branch 150 of the Legion, but two other organizations that were looking for letters of support and looking for financial support you had stated that because of the election process, these requests were held up. With that in mind, is there a clock ticking on the emergency shelter procedure for Branch 150 because we're heading towards the winter, we're heading towards the snow flying and the time when you do see power outages? Was there a deadline that was looming for them?
So to be fair, we didn't write any letters of support for financial support. The ones that we wrote for Capeland Cove and for the Dr. Kingston were letters of support for them to be able to, and it was actually only the Capeland Cove one that waited a long time. One of the things Councillor Marchand was really clear about is, and Councillor Mumbercat reiterated it tonight, we have a lot of community groups that are manned strictly by volunteers. So they see something and they've got 2 days to turn it around and that kind of thing. But my understanding is that in addition to, yes, the winter is coming, there are also dollars that go toward this project at the Legion that must be spent by a certain date, or else they have to give the money back. So nobody wants to see that happen. So very often you have deadlines that, you have to have this money completely spent by this day. So if you go backward, okay, well, the plumber has to be in, the electrician has to be in. So we were really concerned that a delay on our part might very well mean that they might have to return dollars.
Richmond Municipal Council then approved a new code of conduct policy for councillors, which was modeled on changes to the Municipal Government Act. And later in the meeting, council debated the appointment of an investigator for the complaint and investigation process under the new code of conduct.
So we'll now move on, for those following along, it's page 49 of our package, the Bylaw and Policy Committee report for November of 2024. I'll again turn it over to Deputy Warden Brent Sampson.
I've got page 27. I don't know if that's any different than, okay. The committee met, Bylaw Policy Committee report November 2024. The committee met on November 12th, 2024. The committee discussed the new Code of Conduct policy as prescribed by the province. I move that the Bylaw Policy Committee recommend to Council to adopt the new Code of Conduct for elected officials as mandated by the province by the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing for the province of Nova Scotia has made the Code of Conduct for Municipal Elected Officials Regulations, NS Regulations 220/2024, the regulations, and whereas municipalities are required to adopt the model Code of Conduct prescribed by the regulations on or before December 19th, 2024, pursuant to Section 4(1) of the regulations and Section 23A of the Municipal Government Act. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the Municipality of the County of Richmond hereby adopt the model Code of Conduct as set forth in Schedule A to the regulations, which shall be titled the Code of Conduct for Elected Officials of the Municipality of the County of Richmond.
So that's a motion within the Bylaw Policy Committee report. So there's a motion. Can I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Mumbercat. Is there any question on that motion? Discussion? Councillor Mumbercat?
Thank you, Warden. So just to reiterate a couple of the things we discussed at Bylaw and Policy for members of the public who are watching this evening, especially, we did talk about just feedback we had received, I think, through our municipal orientation, Warden, and just in reviewing it, that there could potentially be an opportunity to put in an appeal process with the council member who's the subject of the complaint at the beginning of the investigation, to give them the ability to provide some input or context to the process of somebody determining if a complaint needs to be fully investigated. There was also, some discussion about the sanctions being very punitive in nature and less sort of restorative or rehabilitative. The fast tracking of training. He had also talked a little bit about either a duty to report, and I know there were some concerns expressed around that, but where does the code talk about the responsibility of fellow councillors or staff to kind of report when they see something gone awry? Although that could be complicated. So I'm not sure if any of that could be communicated back to the province, that they explore some additional items in that regard, just to put our, if council was interested, to put our desires on the record, that we would be interested in having maybe even it's in having an additional conversation with municipal affairs to talk about what we see as some of the drawbacks of it, that we could potentially provide some input to help resolve. I don't know, I just, that's kind of where my head was at with the discussion at Bylaw and Policy, and wanted to offer it here as well. I do think it's going to be a living document, right? As it gets applied, people are going to learn and tweak accordingly, so.
So Councillor Mumbercat and I attended council orientation, and there was roundtable discussion. And in fact, the discussion when Councillor Mumbercat went around and when I went around wasn't even the same. So there's a lot of newness around here. At this point, at this juncture, councils are required to adopt this as a minimum standard by December 19th. We chose to do it tonight for fear of a weather event at our December meeting. So there's a motion on the floor now to adopt as we are required to through the regulations. I'm looking to perhaps vote on that, get that put aside, and then if we want to address another motion following that, if we'd like to bring another motion to the floor, or if we'd like to bring it up at a subsequent council meeting. Okay, so perhaps we can revisit this at a subsequent council meeting. Many of us are going to the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities event. Believe there's a session on this, so perhaps we can bring that back at some point. Okay. So at this point, there's a motion on the floor to, that the municipality of the County of Richmond hereby adopt the model code of conduct as set forth in Schedule A to the regulations, which shall be titled the Code of Conduct for Elected Officials of the municipality of the County of Richmond. So we have a motion moved by Deputy Warden Sampson and seconded by Councillor Membriquette. We have any other discussion on that? Okay, so I'll call for a question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, that motion is carried.
Are you satisfied that the new code of conduct will deal with situations like those which arose in past council terms as well as future violations?
I think it is a really good start. I think that there's a lot of things in there that would have dealt with any of the situations we've seen across the province. But I do have a concern. Councillor Membriquette expressed it best, and she did so as well at the Bylaw and Policy Committee. If something egregious happens, one of my colleagues does something horrible. Hey, Lois, I'm stealing from the municipality. You should try it. Something egregious. There is nothing in this code of conduct that makes it a breach of conduct if I don't say, hey, buddy's doing something over there. Like, that duty to report is a concern for some of us. I think there's gray areas in any of those, but duty to report is something that I am concerned about. There was also quite a number of concerns about, through the process, does somebody who is accused of something have an opportunity to appeal? So that really speaks to due process. So what we've seen is that the people who were at the presentation that Councillor Membriquette and I went to, the people who were on the committee had seemed to have done a really deep dive into a lot of these topics. We have not. And so a lot of it is just questions about the unknown. So appeals process. I think sometimes when you see a long list of consequences for, misconduct, I think you might say, oh gosh, I think those are a menu. And so you don't have to select them. So just because they're there, but that is something that has been a concern to some people. It personally isn't to me. But there's important conversations that need to happen about it.
Sometimes timing is everything. The minister responsible, John Lohr, presented this new code of conduct for elected officials less than 48 hours after you were elected and after the municipal elections were over. Even with the unanswered questions, did it bring you any source of relief to know that the province is taking this seriously and they expect their elected officials to step up?
Yeah, I believe that elected officials should have policy that makes it clear that if you behave in ways that you shouldn't, that there are consequences to that. And an absence of that is always going to be a concern. So I think when you put in initial guidelines and initial regulations around code of conduct, that is an excellent place to start. And so I think I would have been more concerned if they had said, no, just wait another year until everybody's questions are answered. To be honest, I would have been more concerned about that. So I think making sure that there is a baseline. There are 50 some, municipalities who are also having the same conversations that we're having that will drive amendments and changes to those regulations. And I think you'll see that as, municipalities go to conferences and that kind of thing, you're going to hear a lot of, well, here's what we did in our municipality. So I think that I would have had much more concern if there hadn't been a shift to start with something.
I wanted to ask you something, Brent, about the new code of conduct for elected officials for municipalities. You served on the last council. You, of course, went through the difficult process of trying to figure out what to do with a councillor that had been found to violate the previous code of conduct. Do you feel what's being presented now is an improvement on what we had before, or what are your thoughts on the new code of conduct?
I think so, but I guess in reality, time will tell. But I think it spells out a clear process for everybody going forward, and everybody's kind of on the same page, one county or municipality to the next. So I think this is a positive outcome in the end. Because the last thing you want to do is council find themselves in a position that they're not sure what steps to take, and trying to do things the proper way, but not being 100% sure. It can be a little nerve-wracking because you don't want to sort of violate anybody's rights unintentionally, and this way, everybody has the same process to follow, and it's clearly laid out, and we're all made aware of it ahead of time. So I think it's a positive step.
Yeah, like particularly like having an independent investigation and an independent investigator kind of keeps it at arm's length, and you don't have council essentially kind of investigating one of their own, which can kind of put you guys in a conflict and at the very least in a bad situation, I guess.
Exactly. That's not not a situation anybody wants to find themselves in. So to have a third party, an independent third party do it, I think is probably better for everybody involved.
Item 11 is wording regarding appointment of an investigator for the complaint and investigation process under the new code of conduct for elected officials as prescribed by the province. And in our meeting notes to the public, it just says verbal. So I just want to give a little bit of clarification here. So earlier this evening, we adopted the new code of conduct for elected officials. Another part of this process under the regulations is that municipalities must appoint an investigator for the complaint and investigation process under this code. So the CAO, so this is a part of the regulations. So the CAO has been in touch with Noah Landry from M-Law, who is our solicitor, EMM Law, who is our solicitor, who has agreed to fill the role as investigator as prescribed by the province. So I'm looking for a motion to appoint Noah Landry of EMM Law as the investigator for the complaint and investigation under the Code of Conduct for elected officials of the municipality of the County of Richmond.
Can I ask a question before we make the motion? Do we have to do this, or was the province going to be doing this?
We are required under the regulations.
So moved then.
Moved by Councillor Marchand. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that motion.
Seconded by Councillor Sean Sampson. Do you have any discussion on the motion? Councillor Membercap?
This is new process for us, and I know that we are required to do this. I don't feel like I have any information as to why Mr. Landry would have been selected, other than I know that we do business with that firm and they've done great work for us. But I would kind of like to know, I'd like to see what are the skill sets, what are the requirements, and then who are the potential candidates. A little bit more of a transparent, I guess, process around that rather than just receiving a recommendation. So I'm not saying that I'm not saying that I think Mr. Landry's not qualified. I just simply don't know. So I'm just wondering if we could get, before we, go down this road, could we get a little bit more information?
Yeah, I have some additional concerns, and that is some of the investigative processes would involve, simple collecting of evidence, which we would be paying a solicitor hundreds of dollars to do. So there are people who are HR consultants who, when you look at the criteria, must have experience with conducting investigations and that kind of thing. So there are people who have done that for HR companies, who are HR consultants, whose hourly rate might be less. I also don't know, and this is new, so I may be entirely wrong on this, but our solicitor works for us, and I'm not confident that there wouldn't be a time where our solicitor filling this role wouldn't be a dual relationship somehow. So I'm strictly speculating on that, but in the absence of conversation about that, I also have some concerns.
Thank you, Warden. I totally agree. I am wondering, though, with the December 19th deadline, if we could make a friendly amendment to have this as a temporary appointment until such time as we could do a little more investigation, on how we could best execute this, on how we could best execute this without costing the taxpayers an exorbitant amount of money for a service that could potentially be procured a lot less expensively. So, I'd be in favor with that, but just in terms of just appointing that person right now for the long run, I wouldn't be in favor. although I do want to underscore again that I really appreciate the good work EMM Law has done for us. So, so I would just leave it at that. Yeah.
Councillor, or Deputy Warden Sampson?
Yeah, I can understand. I think I'd like a bit more information maybe from the CAO on this, but I don't know that we have to worry about the deadline too much on it really, because I'm not sure what they're going to do if we don't meet it. We're in the process of doing it. I mean, they can't send us to bed early. Like, it's not, we haven't had much time to deal with this. So I think I'd rather, if it's a slight delay, I'd rather that we do it right.
Who did the recommendation come from? I thought it was coming from you. Obviously not.
It's coming from the CAO, who unfortunately has had a family emergency and can't be with us this evening. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is, although we were really concerned about getting this motion through on today, November 25th, we do have a council meeting scheduled on December 16th. So we do have another meeting, and we were concerned about a snow event, but I think to Deputy Warden Sampson's point, we would still have some wiggle room in there, and we do certainly have that meeting in between. Is there any other? Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Warden. I appreciate your patience. So I would agree. I am just kind of like, as I'm working this through in my mind, though, should a member of the public register a complaint, or anybody register a complaint against any of us, in the meantime, we would have no real mechanism to deal with it because we don't have an investigator in place. So I would be, I guess, making a motion to make this a temporary assignment until such time as we have more information, just so that we're not empty-handed. I'd be in favor of that, so I would suggest that as a friendly amendment.
At any point, we can change it anyway.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, so we don't have to make it temporary. We can leave the motion as it stands. We'll recommend, but we could change it at any time when we gather more information, or if there's someone else that we have in mind. So I'm okay with leaving it stand, but if you do want to put temporary in there, Councillor Mumbricket, I mean, we don't mind having it as, we'll recommend no as a temporary to fill this role.
Forgive me, is there did somebody make a motion yet? Councillor Mershon seconded. So I believe what we need is a motion to amend the motion to include the word interim or temporary. We vote on that, and then we go back and we vote on the amended, should we choose that, motion. Okay, just to make sure that we've got our ducks in a row.
I'll make a motion to make a friendly amendment to the previously stated motion to add the word interim to it.
So there is a motion on the floor now to amend the motion about the appointment of the investigator to include the word, was it, I'm sorry, temporary? Interim. On that amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed. So we'll go back now to the motion on the floor, which is to the amended motion, which is to appoint, to have an interim appointment of Noah Landry as from EMM Law as the investigator for the complaint and investigation under the Code of Conduct for Elected Officials from the municipality of the County of Richmond. And that was moved by Brian Marchand, seconded by Councillor Sean Sampson. All those in favor of that amended motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you.
There's going to be a little more time given to hiring a full-time permanent investigator for the Code of Conduct. Interim was amended into the original motion regarding Noah Landry of EMM Law. Your thoughts on the idea that council's going to give this a little more time?
So we have, as per the regulations, we have until December 19th to adopt the Code of Conduct. So our next council meeting is December 16th, and should we have a snow event, we were really kind of concerned, and we need to get this adopted, and we certainly are not a municipality who should be behind on this front. So Yesterday, we didn't have a code of conduct, so it didn't matter if we had an investigator. Today, we have a code of conduct because 20 minutes ago, we said we were going to adopt these. So there needs to be, I think council made a good decision here. There needs to be an interim investigator. But there was, I've seen it written out, sort of somebody who has experience with workplace investigations and somebody who did. It doesn't say solicitor. So I think we just want to make sure that we're looking at all of our options and that we're doing that in the most economical way, right? I mean, you don't need to hire an engineer to build your patio. And so, we need to be mindful of municipal dollars and that we're getting the best for our dollars without doing so in an extravagant way. Now, it may be that the solicitor is the best way to go. To be honest, unless I could really say, yes, sir, I think that it's just premature for us to commit to that in the long term.
Is the concern that the municipal solicitor could find themselves in a conflict, being that they're already in an existing position as municipal solicitor, and then they also become an investigator? Is that
So,
aside from monetary
yeah.
considerations?
So my answer to that is, if you were to ask me, could there ever be a conflict? My answer would be, I don't know. So if my answer is I don't know, then I think we need to investigate more.
Can I get some thoughts from you on the idea that Noah Landry is being hired on an interim basis now to give council more time to see what the other candidates might have brought to the table? How do you feel about the way the process unfolded tonight?
Well, I think it was good. It was fine how it unfolded. I think what, the concerns were that we just hadn't really had too much time to think on it. And I think we'd like time to discuss it with the CAO and think about it a little longer. That's all. But, this at least puts somebody in place in the meantime were there any need for it.
As a result of nay votes from Warden Lois Landry, District 1 Councillor Sean Sampson, and District 3 Councillor Brian Marchand, amendments to the Richmond subdivision bylaw were not approved. However, Council did approve amendments to the West Richmond, Central Richmond, Almadam, St. Peters, and Richmond County land use bylaws.
There are two separate items under this item. So it is A, amendment to the Richmond subdivision bylaw. So earlier this evening, a public hearing was held following the first reading approval of this amendment. We heard from staff as well as written and verbal submissions from the public, and those written submissions were read for the record. So I'm open to discussion on this amendment or a motion that council gives second reading approval.
Thank you, Warden. As for the amendment to the subdivision bylaw, I have a lot of concerns of taking out, I don't have a concern so much for taking out surveyed. I think that's a good idea, so it'll save the taxpayer money, but I do have concerns with not having an easement clearly described. And for the listening public that do own pieces of land that, have the burden of having an easement, I think they need to get it clearly addressed before an issue does come forward. For those of you that do have a property and are giving an easement to someone, I think they as well need to be very clear about this, because they could see themselves in the future with someone subdividing a land and an easement that they think that was maybe to the left of their land that could be right through their driveway if they don't clearly describe it, because we see an example that was presented to us by a constituent where the easement, a surveyor gets involved, the EDPC gets involved, and the easement is not what initially was probably stated back 50 plus years ago. So I think for the public that do have easements, get them cleared up before you do run into an issue. For myself, both of these, I was asking the lady that was here from EDPC just about item 2 in reference to landlocked properties. I think we need further discussion on this, just even for myself. Do we totally remove the need for someone to get an easement on a property to be able to subdivide? Or do we have it clearly described, or do we have it surveyed? I think more discussion definitely needs to be had just to protect the public with this. We have it at PAC there will be 2 members of the public on our committee. I'm not, in favor of supporting this right now because I think more discussion needs to be had with the director of planning or somebody from planning just to get maybe examples of people that have had issues with this, or just so that we can hopefully do this in the best interest of everybody involved with them, because I do see, there could be many issues with these easements, for sure. Thank you, Warden, and I won't be supporting this.
Any other initial discussions? Hearing none, I'll await, see if there is a motion.
I'll make a motion for second reading.
There's a motion on the floor.
I'll second it.
Moved by Deputy Warden Brent Sampson, seconded by Councillor Mumbercat, that Council gives second reading approval for the amendments to the Richmond subdivision bylaw as presented. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of Council giving second reading approval to the amendments to the Richmond subdivision bylaw as presented, signify by saying aye. Those opposed? That motion does. So clerk,
You have 3 nays.
3 nays.
Yeah, it doesn't go.
Good. Okay. The next issue is amendment to the West Richmond, Central Richmond, St. Peters, Isle Madame, and Richmond County land use bylaws. And just some clarification here. I discussed this with the clerk earlier, and although during our public hearing, we treated this as one conversation, we actually require a separate motion for each of the land use bylaws. So it is exactly the same amendment, but because they are separate bylaws, we require each, should they be moved, we require that each have their own separate motion. So I'll ask if there's any initial discussion, particularly since we're going to have potentially several. Councillor Marchand? It went off and came. Try again.
Okay. The concerns expressed by the public in reference to the variance and people getting notified, zoning is sold, zoning and variances. I guess for zoning, it's sold on the issue of not having a pig farm next to you. Well, if someone was wanting to rezone and I was a person next, I would want to be notified. And I wouldn't just want that the letter was sent. So just like a variance, if somebody was getting a variance that could affect the use of my property, I would like to know. But it leads back to the question of, are we doing things wrong that we need to give so many variances out? Maybe we need to revisit all of the rules that we have in place and to minimize variances. But I think for us as a municipality or the Planning Commission, having it sent out by registered mail would definitely ensure that they've sent something out. I don't know where they're getting the addresses. Are the addresses coming from the tax bill? Is it something that they get on property online? I don't know where they get them, but I did hear a case as well that someone didn't get it for many, many days. So was it sent out, or was it sent out to the wrong address? I don't know. But I think we need to ensure that at the minimum, they are sent out through registered mail so that we know something was sent. So I won't be supporting this change as well.
Any other comments, concerns?
I'll move to give it second reading. I think we would probably be having these discussions once we've moved and seconded it, you know what I mean, rather than prior, yeah.
Yeah, in this instance, yeah, okay. So we have a motion to give second reading, if I can put words in your mouth, to give second reading approval to the West Richmond land use bylaw as presented. And we'll have to go through each of these as its own entity. Do we have a seconder? Seconded, so moved by Deputy Warden Brent Sampson and seconded by Councillor Mumbercat, that we give second reading approval to the West Richmond land use bylaw as presented. So is there discussion on the motion aside from what we've heard?
Yeah, no, the only thing I'd like to add to that is just, so what it is here is adding those 7 days to the notice. You know, whether or not we wanted to go down the route of registered mail, it would be a whole separate, like, we have gone through that, but it's a new council, so there might be a different appetite for it. You know, it's up to anybody around this table whether they want to support this or not. I think the motion we have in front of us, though, does improve the ability for somebody to be able to get notice. Does it improve it as far as some people may like to see? Maybe not, and maybe that's a whole other discussion. But I kind of feel like turning this down tonight is sort of pitting the good against the perfect, if you're not satisfied with it.
So if I'm understanding your argument correctly, this actually makes the bylaw more stringent, and a question about registered mail could be brought up at another time. And so we're not removing registered mail. We are in fact increasing the length of time from 14 to 21 days, and that's the only change of substance in here. Okay, so we have any other discussion?
Yeah. It does bring it from 14 to 21 days, but if someone doesn't get the letter, it doesn't matter how many days we give them. So, yeah, we can approve it tonight, but I definitely would want to have further discussion as to how this is sent. The extra 7 days, if someone doesn't get it, doesn't really matter. And it is deemed sent after 3 days. So I don't know if the 21 days starts then or if it's the day they send it. So is it 21 after the 3rd day?
And either way, this adds 7 to it. You know what I mean? Regardless. Yeah, regardless, this is making it more accessible for people. Yeah.
I just think if we support it now, I hope that it wouldn't die. So I won't be supporting it. And I would like to make the 2 changes. Give people extra time. Problem with extra time, it slows down development, but I think the neighbors need to know. If they definitely, at all costs, know, whether it's a phone call, an email, or registered mail, the 14 days is probably enough. When someone's going to get it, I think they're going to reply fairly quick. Thank you, Warden.
So I'm clear. Are you moving an amendment to the motion to include registered mail? I just want to be clear about what you moved.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can do that, but if people are,
I don't believe we'd be able to do that just because it would have to go back. If it was a change, it would have to go back to first reading, public hearing, and so on.
So
Yeah.
you're requesting just a friendly audience on this at a future time?
I think I can make amendments providing that the mover is okay with me making that amendment, but if he or she is not, then I can't make it. Maybe the
Deputy Warden?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it would be proper to make an amendment to something at second reading after the public hearing. But I wouldn't be comfortable with it just because I don't feel like we'd be going through the process properly, but I could be incorrect. I think if we wanted to add this in the future, it's definitely a kind of conversation can be had at PAC.
So I believe the motion on the floor is to make the bylaw more restrictive in that we are adding 7 days from 14 to 21. I think an amendment to this amendment is premature, given that that's not what we publicized at the public hearing. So I'm comfortable looking at this on a future day around the additional restrictions for example, registered mail, but I think that would go through a different process. We didn't have registered mail before. We're not getting rid of registered mail. Deputy or Councillor Lumbercat?
Thank you, Warden. So what we could do is, following the vote on this motion, somebody could make a motion to refer the issue of registered mail back to the PAC, and then it could go, we could take care of that motion in this meeting tonight, so then we know that it's on the PAC agenda. We'll have, new members of council there, but also potentially new members of the public, so it could be a whole different discussion.
So I think that's reasonable. So what we'll do is we'll vote on the amendment as it is moved by Deputy Warden Sampson and Councillor Mumbercat. And then following each of these, I would be open to a reference back to PAC. Yes? Okay.
Okay, so we're just voting then on the amendment that's in this package to change from set. And you're okay with us making a motion to send it back? Okay. Okay with me.
You can make any motion. You can make the motion. It may not, but we're not at that point. We're at this point where we're discussing 14 to 21 days. So the motion on the floor is that council give second reading approval to the West Richmond land use bylaws as presented, and that presentation includes the change of 14 days to 21 days. Okay. No other discussion on that? I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the I'll say it again. All those in favor of council giving second reading approval to the West Richmond land use bylaw as presented, please signify by saying aye. 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 Those opposed? Opposed. So we'll record that as 3-4 and 2 against. So I'm going to ask for subsequent the remaining, one at a time, motions for council to give second reading approval, in this instance, to the Central Richmond land use bylaws as presented.
I'll make that motion. West Richmond.
Each of these, West Richmond, Central Richmond, Isle Madame, St. Peters, Richmond County, yes. Yep. No, and because I clarified with the clerk before, we did the public hearing that way because in essence it is the same situation, but for the purpose of bylaw amendments, because they are different bylaws, they have to be done separately. So there is a motion on the floor, which was moved by Deputy Warden Sampson, to give second reading approval to the Central Richmond land use bylaw. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Mumbercat. Do we have any new discussion on this matter? All those in favor of the motion, the council gives second reading approval to the Central Richmond land use bylaw, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? I'm opposed. Great. 1 or 2? I thought I saw your hand go up for yes.
Yeah, so does this include?
It's the second one.
Yeah, so then
So your vote is nay. Great. So we have 3 in favor of the Central Richmond and 2 opposed. So I'll call for a motion for the council gives second reading approval for the Isle Madame land use bylaw as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Deputy Warden Sampson. We have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Mumbercat, that council gives second reading approval for the Isle Madame land use bylaws as presented. Any new discussion? None. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? So the vote is 3-2. Looking now for council to give second reading approval for the St. Peters land use bylaws as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Deputy Warden Sampson, seconded by Councillor Mumbercat to approve, for second reading approval for the St. Peter's land use bylaws as presented. Any new discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? 2 votes no, 3 votes yes. And finally, we're looking for council to give second reading approval for the Richmond County Land Use Bylaw as presented. I have a mover.
I'll move that.
Seconded by Deputy Warden Sampson. Sorry, moved by Deputy Warden Sampson, seconded by Councillor Mumbercat. Do we have any new discussion on that motion? We are calling for council to give second reading approval for the Richmond County Land Use Bylaw as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion is carried 3-2. Now, would anyone have anything more to say under land use bylaws?
I'll make a motion to refer the issue of registered mail back to the Planning Advisory Committee.
And I'll second that.
So
Oh, I forgot to press my button.
Councillor, sorry. So moved by Councillor Mumbercat to refer the matter of registered mail back to the Planning Advisory Committee, seconded by Councillor Marchand. Is there any additional discussion on that matter? Okay, I'll call for question. All those in favor of all those in favor of referring this back to the PAC, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion is carried.
District 3 Councillor Brian Marchand shared some concerns with amendments to the subdivision and land use bylaws, and chiefly over notification, I guess, is what we're referring to. And you know, how people are notified and who's notified and things like that. Do you share those concerns, or do you think that those things can be, kind of dealt with later, and, when you guys discuss this further, I guess?
So, yeah, it turned out to be a little bit of awkward timing, I guess, because of the changeover in council. The previous council was sort of up to speed on these things, but however, I don't think it would have been unanimous even with the previous council. All we were doing tonight was basically adding 1 week to the notification process. So when there's an application for a variance, there's a distance surrounding, I believe, maybe 30 meters, 100 feet or so at a minimum. Any property owners around there are notified. So the Planning Commission will send out letters to any property owners that are within that range to give them notice in case they want to appeal the variance. So all we were doing tonight was extending that timeline from 14 days to 21 days because, in normal times when we're not under a Canada Post strike, the mail is considered delivered after 3 days, as according to how this is written. But, many of us have busy lives and we may not pick up the mail every day. Somebody may be a week away or 2 weeks away. So it was to try and give people a little bit of extra time. So we were probably slowing down the process by a week, and we were aware of that. But on the other hand, we were trying to give people a little bit more ability to be able to appeal this if possible. However, I can understand Councillor Marchand's concerns were about sending the letters out via registered mail. It was a discussion we had quite a bit at the Planning Committee in the past, but I'm happy to do that again. Previously, I chaired that committee, but I don't know that that'll be the case going forward. But either way, all 5 councillors now sit on it, so it'll be good for everybody to be on the same page, and the will of council will decide which way we go on that. But I think tonight it was still a positive outcome, even with his concerns. I mean, we can add those things if council decides that's what they want to do.
Yeah, the amendments went through. They were approved despite some objections. I believe District 1 Councillor Sean Sampson also voted against those amendments too. But as you mentioned, it will go forward, but you guys can discuss some more of the, complexities and other matters such as notification and things like that.
Yeah, and I think even the 2 people that raised concerns on it with the written submissions we had at the public hearing, they were both concerned that this didn't go far enough. However, they both did agree that it was a positive step. So that was kind of how I was looking at it, that, if we want to go further, that discussion can be had.
Thank you for watching. Please tune in again to find out what we will be talking about on The Record.